Hi everyone. I have a lot of things that I've been wanting to talk about, and one of the things that I've been wanting to talk about is the third day that's mentioned in Exodus 19, verse 11, where God said to Moses, "And be ready against the third day, for the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai." And I wanted to talk about the significance of the third day and what I believe it means. And in particular, I wanted to talk about how I believe this has to do with DNA. From what I've noticed, whenever a scripture comes up in verse 11, it usually has something to do with DNA, and I believe that's the case with this as well. In fact, I believe that's the theme of the entire Bible, and that's what I wanted to talk about. But I also wanted to point out that although the third day is mentioned when Moses went up the mountain the first time, it wasn't until Moses went up the mountain the second time that he removed the veil from his face. If you look over here in verses 33 through 35, it says, "And till Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And he came out and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. And Moses put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with him." So you see that this is when Moses took the veil off his face, and the children of Israel saw the face of Moses. Well, this is very significant because in the New Testament it explains what that represents. And you find that in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, where it says, "But their minds were blinded, for until this day remaineth the same veil, untaken away in the reading of the Old Testament, which veil is done away in Christ. But even unto this day, when Moses is read, the veil is upon their heart. Nevertheless, when it shall turn unto the Lord, the veil shall be taken away." And so this all has to do with the restoration. This is referring to the time when the blinders are removed from Israel and they're grafted back into the olive tree. And you see here in verse 17 is where it talks about both branches being grafted into the same tree and partaking of the root and the fatness of the olive tree together. As you see, it says here, partaker, and became partaker with them. The Gentiles became partakers with the Jews of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. This is when the two come together. And it's interesting that that comes up in verse 17, because it's in Ezekiel 37:17, where you have these two sticks coming together. And you see that comes up in verse 17, where God said to Ezekiel to join the two sticks together into one stick so that they will become one in your hand. And then when you go to Leviticus 23 verse 17, you see that that's when the two wave loaves are presented. It says, "You shall bring out of your habitation 2 wave loaves of 2/10 deals of flour. They shall be a fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits unto the Lord." Okay, and this seems to be after 2 cycles of counting the omer, because if you go back to verse 15, it says, "And ye shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. You shall bring out of your habitation 2 wave loaves of 2 tenth steals. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baken with leaven. They are the first fruits unto the Lord. So it sounds like it's representing or specifying 2 cycles of counting the omer, which would match up to the fact that Moses went up the mountain 2 times. And it wasn't until the second time that the veil was removed from Moses' face, that he removed the veil and the children saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. And then Moses put the veil back on his face again until he went to speak with him. So this is when the children saw the face of Moses. This is a type and shadow of Israel seeing the face of God and having the veil removed from their heart. And then the next verse 17 says, now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. So you see the liberty mentioned in verse 17. And that's what this is really all about. It's about being set at liberty from the bondage to sin. And of course that was only accomplished through what Christ did on the cross. And if we accept his sacrifice on the cross, that's the only way we can be set free and be set at liberty and have our DNA restored to the way it was meant to be. And that's what this is all a representation of. That's what these 2 trees represent. That's what the Jews and the Gentiles represent. And I believe that's what's being represented by what took place on Mount Sinai as well. And I'll get into that a little more, into why I believe this is talking about DNA and what the third day represents. But I just want to say that I believe that that's the theme of the entire Bible. I believe it's all about the DNA. I believe that's even why there were 2 tablets that the 10 Commandments were written on. I believe that's why Moses went up the mountain twice, why he broke the first set of the 10 Commandments, and then he went up again to receive the second set. And also believe that's why there was 2 comings of Christ, because everything has to be rent in twain, just as the veil of the temple was rent. And so even the 70th week was broken in half. It was effectively rent in twain, just like the temple veil, because it was in the midst of the week that the Messiah was cut off. It was after the 69 weeks, so it was in the midst of the 70th week, after he had come to confirm the covenant for 3.5 years. Jesus was the bridegroom, and then he was taken away in the midst of the week, and then he's going to come back for the second coming. So the 70th week was rent in twain, just like the veil was rent. If you look at the word midst in the Hebrew, you see that it's Strong's 2677. It's interesting that it ends with 77, and this is the Hebrew year 77. But if you look at the word, you see that it means half, and it actually means to divide or to sever, because if you look at the word that it comes from, the etymology of the word, you see that it comes from another very similar word that means to divide or cut into 2 parts, or to cut in half. So when you go back to the Hebrew word for midst, you see that it means half, middle, or 2 parts. So it's talking about dividing it in half. And I believe this is all symbolic of the DNA and what's going to take place with the DNA, because with the DNA you have what's called the leading strand, which is on the right, and then you have a lagging strand on the left. So if you think about the Ten Commandments, for example, and you think about the first set as being on the left because that's what comes first, and then second would be to the right because that's what came second. Well, this first part was broken apart. And if you think of the entire Bible, you have the Old Testament came first, and so that would be on the left, and then you have the New Testament would be on the right because that came second. And then the Old Testament, Jesus did away with that when he fulfilled it, when he fulfilled the commandments, the covenant of God, and he nailed the commandments, the Ten Commandments and the ordinances to the cross, which brought sin and condemnation because nobody can fulfill them perfectly. So Jesus had to fulfill it for us, and he nailed them to the cross. And then he made a new covenant with many, as it says here. He made the covenant with many, and you see that that's the Hebrew number 7227. You can find that in Matthew 26 verse 27, but it starts out with verse 26, and it says, "And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed it and brake it and gave it to the disciples and said, 'Take, eat, this is my body.' And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, 'Drink ye all of it, for this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many for the remission of sins.'" So this is when Jesus made the new covenant with many. Okay, so Jesus made the new covenant by fulfilling the old covenant and doing away with the old covenant and replacing it with the new covenant. But he didn't destroy it, he fulfilled it by making a new and better covenant that was founded on better promises. As it says in Hebrews 8, it says, "But now hath he obtained a more excellent ministry, by how much also he is the mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises." And so the entire Bible is a picture of the DNA being restored. Over here you have Ephraim and Manasseh, and Manasseh was actually the firstborn, and he represents the Jews. But then Ephraim, which was the younger one, God said in Jeremiah, he said, "Ephraim is my firstborn." You can see that here in Jeremiah 31:9. It says, "They shall come with weeping and with supplications, and I will lead them. I will cause them to walk by the rivers of water in a straight way, wherein they shall not stumble. For I am a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn." So this again is a picture of the restoration of the DNA. And so that's why you have Ephraim on the right, because the Gentiles received the gospel first. Because the Jews are currently blinded, but the blinders will come off very soon, probably sometime this year. It's mentioned in verse 17 that the two come together, and this is when the restoration will take place. And this is all a picture of the DNA, because with the DNA you have a leading strand, which is on the right, and then a lagging strand on the left. And I'll explain a little more how that works in the next video. But if you go to Zechariah 3:1, you see it says, "He showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him." Okay, this is right before it talks about the 7 candlesticks and the 2 olive trees. But if you look at this picture of Jesus with the devil, if you can just imagine them standing, normally when you arm wrestle you use your right hand. So Jesus would be standing and this would be his right hand. So that means the devil would be on his left. So you have Jesus on the right and then the devil on the left. And then it goes on to talk about the 2 olive trees in Zechariah 4:11. And I don't believe it's by accident that it mentions the 2 olive trees in verse 11. And it also talks about them in Revelation 11. But I'm about out of time, so I'll have to continue in the next video. Thank you.